Okay, good morning. We will resume today's Water Rates Committee. Thank you all for being patient and holding on with us. I believe we have both Directors Heerwagen and Hull on the line. Karen, can you hear us?
Ask her to unmute.
Oh, Karen, I think you need to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you. And I apologize to everyone who's patiently waited for me to get connected. So sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you for being here. So I think we'll just go ahead and jump right into our meeting. It's about 9:15. This is a continuation of our ongoing rates discussion that we've really started after before last summer. Marvin will give a quick overview of some of the board direction. Director Hull, I know that Director Heck has been present at these meetings, so this is one of your first meetings, I think, that you're here in person, quote unquote. But we'll give you and the rest of the public an overview of where we're at. We'll get into the board direction that was given last spring in order to build rates for starting January 1, 2022. Marvin will then go through our 5-year financial forecast. We've got some good news, as the board heard last board meeting, in the fact that we're using a baseline, which is baseline of available cash, which is higher than what we had been previously using on our 5-year forecast. So we'll see the fallout of that and discuss. Just so the board or the public is aware, this meeting is not a meeting that we are actually sitting here and setting the rate structure. We are looking at forecasts and we're looking at alternatives. The goal here is probably at the next rate meeting, I'm assuming, I think we will have our rates consultant here to help us start working through the 218 process and the package. But that's to be determined by the board, I think. We'll be bringing this updated package that we discussed today and our 5-year forecast to the full board on the 14th, which is Wednesday of next week, which will include how we present the package, the 5-year forecast today. Okay. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mr. Davis, and we'll go from there.
Good morning, committee, and this is an interactive meeting where people just can chime in as we go through the model. Director Hall, you are. We will give you an overview of the board direction. The board gave us direction in terms of developing the model, and the model itself is essentially saying this is the cost the district will incur over the next 5 years. Those costs then will be broken down into the water rates, but the cost will be the cost. It'll just be determining how we will recover the cost. So this model is very important in terms of the assumptions that are in it, that are driving the cost. So also, as we continue to move through it, nothing is set in stone. We will take this model, and as Greg said, we will update the board, the full board, on an informational meeting so they can see the assumptions in the model and they can see how progress is going. We'll pull up the rate schedule so you can see the rate schedule and the timing of the meetings in terms of when we think things will happen, including the 218 notice going out to the customers. So the board gave us direction. There was 4 large points that the board gave direction. One of the things the board gave us direction was regarding the allocation base to use as we recover the cost. So the model forecast the cost, and the board gave us direction in terms of how to recover that. The board wanted us to use an allocation base that was based upon the 2020 cost of service, historical cost of service, as well as the number of accounts. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pull up the model, and as we kind of walk through the model, you will be able to see that the model is adhering to the direction of the board, and therefore it'll make sense in terms of, oh, okay, that's where the model is addressing the board's direction. And so we will pull up the model, the 5-year forecast model. We'll pull up the model now. This may be your first time seeing the model. Is Director Hall, is this your first time seeing the model?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And so this is the model that...
Sorry, Marvin. I did see the 5-year forecasted budget that you did last fall. So I'm familiar with how you organized it then. And so anyway, just so you know that, I did pay quite a bit of attention to that.
Yes, this is essentially the same model, just continuing to go through different iterations. So it's kind of the same thing. It's going through different iterations.
Okay.
So the first tab, the assumptions tab. So we click on this tab and we can open it up a little bit there. This is where the magic happens. So this is where essentially we can put in different rate increases, and then as we put in different rate increases, you'll see them working through the financials and the cash reserves. On the left side, you can see all of our revenue assumptions. These are the assumptions that are driving the model. Right now, as you can see, the 5.72% in 2021, this is essentially the adopted rates for the 2021 budget. So these rates were adopted. You notice how the base rate and the treated rate are the same. So currently we have the same structure. The base rate received the same as the treated rate. We can change that as we go forward because the board has given the direction that we want to recover 50% in the base rate and 50% in the usage rate. So we can adjust that. The connection demand, see that 1% there?
Yeah.
What that is essentially saying is that we expect to have 1% in growth per year, so over the next 5 years. As we do our DFWEs, I think we have 2 in the works now, Chip. I'm not sure. I think we have 2. I think we just approved, what was it, Loma Rica? We just approved Loma Rica. Loma Rica is about to go forth. So as those people go forward, they connect and they demand more water. And so we're hoping that we'll have 1% per year in connection growth. The hydro revenue, this is essentially, we believe we will have 1.4% annual revenue. Now, interesting thing in the hydro assumption, you see for 2024, we're assuming a 20% reduction in 2024 for hydro revenue. What that means is that we're going to have to rewind the Chicago powerhouse. So it's a big loss in revenue in 2024. As we get on hydro's financials, you'll see that drop. I'm just going through the complexity so you can see the model has assumed a lot of stuff.
So I have a question about that. As soon as I saw that, Marvin, I'm glad you started with that one because I was curious why we're using revenue, operation revenue rather than reserves and or capitalizing those projects for that rewind.
So the rewind, there's a couple of things going on. So when we rewind, we will take the powerhouse offline. And our contract basically says that if the powerhouse aren't available to make power, you won't get the revenue.
Oh, okay. I knew there was.
Yeah. And not only that, you got a double whammy. You go lose the revenue and you go put the expense in to do the infrastructure.
Okay.
So you got double whammy. So click on the hydro tab we'll go back to the bigger guy. We'll go back to the assumptions guy. And so when we go up to the top, now you can see the hydro revenue line. See what happens in 2024? Revenue goes down to 19.6, and it was at 24. So you can see the model has that built in.
And that comes out of the power purchase agreement?
Yeah, the PPA says that if it's not available to make power, they can't pay you.
They're going to pay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so also in 2025, there is other stuff happening as well. I think 2025 is a smaller rewind, but it's in the model. And I checked with Ken on those. So we'll go back to the assumptions. Now, the recreation revenue, see that 10%? That 10% is they're assuming that right now annually, I think we're increasing recreation rates by 5%. 10% is actually what's kind of needed to build recreation revenues and to push back from hydros transfer in and to catch up on COVID. So COVID this year for recreation, we lost about 800,000 in revenues, 800,000 for COVID in 2020. So this increase here is kind of to build that back up. And so as we get to recreation, you'll see how that 10% filters down into its reserves. The property taxes, we're assuming 4% per year. This is a good assumption. Our property taxes has been growing at about 4.7% per year from 2014. There's a good assumption. I don't think COVID is going to stop that. I haven't seen too many foreclosures. The stimulus packages have pretty much kept everything running. So the other revenue, this 4% is other types of revenue, and those have been kind of consistent. Connection revenue, reimbursements, leases. That's the annual increase. The investment income, I'm going with a 1%. I could probably increase that, but I don't want to be too aggressive with revenue because all of the revenue sources that we increase, it'll impact how much rate revenue we want. So right now, we're only making about 1% on the investment portfolio due to COVID and stuff. So I figure we keep it there.
So
the transfer in. Keep going. I didn't hear you.
Sorry. On the investment income, is that almost 100% now investment income from hydro's bonds that are, or is that a mix of also some water funds that are in reserve and earning interest earning, I should say?
That's a good question. Right now, in our current policy, all of the interest earnings on our reserves, we are crediting to the water fund. So hydro has right now, click on that tab, click on the water tab, and you can open it up thanks to that. And scroll down to that, and scroll down a little bit more. Thanks, Greg. Okay, stop right there. Now, this, where you see NID unrestricted reserves, you see that category, NID unrestricted reserves total?
Yes.
Okay. This is the reserves that are available to operate the system. We have the restricted reserves, but we cannot operate the system with those, right? So these are unrestricted. Right now, the beautiful thing about it, you see that water dollar that says 14.4 million?
Yes.
I had thought that was going to be about 8 million at the time we approved the 2021 budget. Now it's 14.4, and we did a pretty decent audit on that number. Hydro's reserves about 54.5. So right now in our policy, all of the unrestricted reserves are credited to the water fund. The board adopted that policy, and that's fine. They can do it. So that interest earnings that you saw on the assumptions page, that about $3.2 million, that is all going to credit it to the water fund.
Okay. But those sources right there, the 14,922,000 and 54 million are the sources of that interest income.
Exactly. Very good. Very good. Those are the sources of it. And the crediting to water is essentially because water does all of the administrative overhead, running payroll for the other funds, doing financial general management oversight. So that's what that crediting is for. Okay. And so we'll go back to the assumption. The transfer ends. Now, this here is the first, this is how we will demonstrate that the model is set up according to board direction. See the transfer ends from hydro that says 30 million. So we go to the water financial, and then we scroll up a little bit to the financials, and we stop right there. So Director Hall, you see the transfer in hydroelectric line?
Mm-hmm.
That's the $6 million that we're going to be transferring in to the water fund every year, and that's board direction. One of the board directions was to provide a sustainable amount of transfer ins. You notice how much we transfer in 2020?
Yeah.
That is not sustainable. So
Right.
The board's direction is, okay, dial this down and only use a sustainable portion. So the model assumes we will use $6 million per year. So we go back to the assumption.
Yeah. I also notice in that we continue to transfer in the property taxes as we have this year, and that is included in. I think that I just want to, for me, I emphasize to myself that that's money that is going away from the capital program to provide for operating costs and water.
And that would be correct. And again, that is another one of the directions from the board.
Yeah.
The board says that we will be able to use some property taxes over the next 5 years to sustain operations, service debt. And if you go into the water funds model, so we go into the water fund, we can see how much we are anticipating using. Now, here's the thing. That number is not set in stone like none of these numbers. But right now, the model is saying that we will use about $5 to $4 million per year in property taxes to service debt, as well as to subsidize operations, and that is direction from the board. So the model is addressing that. So we go.
I'm sorry, Marvin.
No. You definitely chime in and interrupt because that's what
This committee is about.
That's what it's about. It's a workshop.
Workshop.
The question I have is, I'm sure that in your position, you're not just looking at this vantage point of the forecast, but you have a sense of the longer term view of the district. Is your gut that if we are we going to continue to need to use that approximately $4 to $5 million per year in property taxes, short of really raising rates even more? And if you don't have a view on that, that's fine. I just suspect that you do have a view, and I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I definitely have a view. I think it's appropriate to do it. As you think through it, the debt we're servicing, essentially our debt is about $4 million a year, our debt.
Mm-hmm.
That debt itself has financed long-term capital projects over about 20, 25 years in the bonds. So it's kind of logical that the property taxes would service that debt. So that's essentially what you're doing, because the debt itself has been issued for capital projects that have lasted 20 to 25 years. So it kind of makes sense to use some of the property taxes to service that debt. Kind of makes sense.
And do you anticipate the need from a fiscal point of view to continue to do that beyond 2026?
Oh, yes. The debt itself is not going to be paid off until 2035.
Okay.
So, yeah, that debt itself needs servicing, and it's benefiting treatment. It's benefiting customers because I think we piped a big portion of the canal. So that's benefiting treated guys, raw guys. They're getting a benefit. It's more efficiency in the system, right?
Marvin, would it also be fair to say that that's not really a change? The district has done this in the past as well, correct? You've used property taxes in the past to help supplement rate years ago. Maybe not in the last couple of years, but
Not in recent history.
Not in a recent history. I think Tim could be right. I've been here for 5 years, and over my 5 years, we haven't. But if you go back beyond that, Chip could be right.
Yeah.
We may have used that legal weighed in on it. Property taxes are unrestricted. We can use them for whatever purpose we want to, you know.
You know, I would add though, Director Hull and Spearwagon, that you're taking away from something in order to benefit something else, right? So we're taking away $4 to $5 million a year in upgrades to the system, the aging infrastructure that we would utilize for capital, in order to benefit the subsidy for the rates. So just so you're aware, like, it's not a matter, I hear your point.
I think the other point, go ahead.
All I wanted to just finish, I hear your point, Director Hull, on that, is that these are, and Marvin's exactly right, these are payments, we're utilizing this section of the property taxes in order to pay down those long-term debts that we've incurred doing capital investments in the past. Moving forward and projecting $4 to $5 million a year in utilizing property taxes, we have used it before, certainly, but it takes away from capital investment into the system that we otherwise might have used those property taxes for.
Yes.
That's the point. I think, just not to speak for Karen, but you can correct me, Karen, I think the track you're on is we don't have that money available to use on capital improvement, but the projection shows a whole bunch of borrowing that we're going to do capital improvement. Is that correct?
Yes, it does.
It's been Marvin's recommendation since I've been here to you're in the long term, you're better off to borrow money than to spend reserves.
So is that a correct statement then to say that we're using the tax revenue to pay back capital projects?
Improvements,
Yes,
right.
I think that's correct.
So
we're
in a
not,
roundabout sort of way, we're still using property tax
right,
for capital.
we're not delaying.
Just not future capital.
We're not delaying capital improvements for the sake of the budget. We're rejiggering it to work
Yeah,
to our favor over the long term.
yeah,
Is that correct? Is that,
correct statement.
because I know that Karen's on this, capital improvement plan. Where do we stand with it? We're gonna get into that later, because we're fuzzy about where do we really need to be with that, and how do we get there? And I think we're on track, but it's gonna take a while to,
I think Greg's point, though, is a little subtly different than this conversation, because what I hear him saying is that, at least in the recent past, that $4 to $5 million that we are now spending to pay debt, that we historically used for capital projects, we're now using it to fund debt. And so we have $4 to $5 million less per year for the capital program itself. And so, yes, we can take out more debt, and but I think that is what I've heard from previous conversation, is that we kind of really cut the capital program for water to the bare bones for 2021, and that's not sustainable. But if we look at this and we go over the long term, we're continuing to take that money out of the capital program. And to me, that's important.
Chip, could you address what she just said? I think, because I'm fuzzy in my mind, that I will say that, seat of the pants, we didn't cut the capital improvement, but we cut operations.
Yeah, you got a tab.
Yeah, it's maybe a good time. It may be a good time. We'll switch, we'll scroll down a little bit. So we scroll down just a little to, there we go, capital projects.
Because the board did vote to have a pause in the budget. That's correct. How much we cut out of the capital, I'm not.
So in this instance, and this is a good point, the capital, this is a 5-year model, and we always got to think about it in terms of the long-term economic impact of it. Right now, remember, the board approved only about $6 million in capital projects for the 2021 budget. That basically cut it in half. But now we're saying that going into the forecast, that ain't sustainable. We got to take it back to about 11. Now here's the thing. Also, obviously, that 11 million is less because see that transfer out debt service. So we're going to be transferring out that $5 million up until the operating account. So essentially, if you weren't transferring that out, you could even do more projects. But you can see 11 million, that could be a sustainable amount.
Marvin, if I could just overview real quick. This slide is telling us that projected forward, we anticipate a total of 16 million in tax revenue.
Total tax revenue. So if you scroll up just a little, right there, stop. Okay. So this says that you're going to receive about 15 million in tax revenue per year. This is a good assumption. And then we will do capital projects of about 11, and we will transfer out about 22 million in capital projects up to the operating fund to service the debt. But I think it's always a good idea not to dump out all of your reserves. Right now, this is a good time to borrow because rates are low. Bad time is to invest. So it's a good time to borrow. So, you know, throughout your business cycles, you have good borrowing times, you got good investment times. This is a good borrowing time because the rates are low. So, but like what Chip was saying, historically, the district may have used some property taxes to service debt before I came here.
So what this is saying essentially is just that we're projecting 5 years that we use property taxes to help supplement the rates. It reduces the funding in order to do capital projects, yet we're bumping that capital project, you know, overall availability from 6 million in 2021 up to 11. So we're expanding. Well, we're rebounding a bit more.
We're rebounding, yeah.
Not to the full extent that perhaps we were back in 2020 and before, but we're not. You know, we're compensating, just not completely.
Yeah.
So Karen, I was wrong about the capital, obviously about that, but I was fuzzy in my mind. We didn't eliminate it, but it was cut.
Yeah, it was cut.
For 21. And also iterating that we recognize all these things were not sustainable, but we needed this time for this board to get a handle on where we wanted to go, and it's been a heavy lift.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Also, too, since we're on the capital, there's a tab that's called New Debt. The New Debt, that tab.
Yes.
There we go. Okay, so we'll open this guy a little bit. So, over this 5-year window, these are perhaps some of the projects we can do by issuing new debt. And so right now, the model is set up essentially to demonstrate how much debt the district can take over 5 years and still be within its covenants and still have good reserves. So essentially the model is saying that the district can take about $83.5 million in debt if it needed to. Some of these big projects we will probably likely have to do over this 5-year period. We don't know, obviously, the order of them just yet.
Well, like, for instance, we don't know when FERC is going to kick in, right? Right.
Yeah, we don't know when we will have to start spending for that permanent license. We're getting annual licenses now, so we don't know when we're going to start kicking in for a permit. We know it's going to be sometime, we just don't know when.
So, Marvin, assuming we go into this new debt in the next 5-year window, after that 5-year window is over, is it a fair assumption to say that we're going to continue to rely upon property tax transfer in to pay for that debt?
That is correct. Chip makes a good assumption, and I would assume that the district will always use some of its property taxes to service debt. Because it's a good assumption because these capital projects, once this infrastructure is done, it's going to last 30, 40, 50 years. So obviously the ratepayers are going to be getting a benefit for 40, 50 years. So it kind of makes sense that you use some of that to service that. Kind of makes sense.
That kind of goes back to Karen's original question of, do you foresee us needing those funds in the future?
Yeah, I
beyond
would
the
think so.
2026 is.
Yes,
I think
definitely.
it's helpful to know if an assumption, if we start a practice today, is that a practice that likely would have to continue? So that was kind of my question.
Well, you know, I'll add to that, and just a caveat that this model is nothing but assumptions, right?
Yeah.
We're gonna be looking at this on an annual basis. Right now, we're utilizing the model today in April of 2021 in order to project and think about a rates package, right? Maybe that rates package is 1 year long, maybe it's 5 years long. We don't know yet. So the assumptions that we see today anticipate it changing over time, and at the request of the board, at the direction of the board, at the recommendation of finance and management. But I think we look at this not in a stagnant, and I know you're not Director Hull at all, but I think for the public listening this is a malleable document, and all the assumptions that are on it even today have the ability to change before our rates package is complete.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I do notice that in this bond issue, that the projected is that all of this is for hydro projects, and that the Lake Wildwood is the only funded capital project for the water area. And I just make that as an observation and wonder about how, and not necessarily for discussion now, but maybe we can continue this in the board session, that we have the CIP for water that has a number of capital projects that don't appear to have a funding source. And so I think at some point we're going to want to integrate our view of this to include that CIP and revisit those projects in light of this bond issuance and the impact it has on our debt service coverage ratio.
So that segues my question, Karen, about this is in addition to the 11 million that's in the budget for operation capital improvement. So there is a list in there that we're not seeing here. This is strictly one for capital, for
Bonded debt.
bonding.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
including the E. George, the backbone project is still in flux, right?
Yeah.
But
Right.
and this 5-year forecast is district-wide.
Yes, it's
Right.
district-wide. It's district-wide. And the way this model is set up is that all of this new debt, this 83.5, will be funded from hydro. So all of this new debt issuance will be funded from hydro, the way the model is set up. Water will keep funding its approximately $4 million. This new debt, hydro will pick up.
So this is debt incurred by the district,
Yes,
not
but
necessarily solely that would be covered in the future, perhaps by water.
the way it's set up, that in the board can obviously desire how we would do it, but the way it's set up is that when we issue our debt, the district posts all revenue sources to pay the debt. The district posts property taxes, the district posts rates, the district posts hydro fees. We're posting everything to pay the debt. And so the district can choose how it wants to service the debt, but we post everything. So this model assumes that we will use hydro's revenue sources to fund this new debt. And so that's the luxury of our district. We got several revenue sources that we can post to service the debt. So if we go back to the assumptions. Okay, so we were looking at, that was good. We kind of explored capital a little. And Director Hull, your comments are noted. The details of the capital project schedule, the summary figures were rolled into this model, not how we arrived at which projects to do, but the summary figures rolled into these guys. So those are kind of the revenue assumptions. The last one is capacity fees. we're assuming that we will do about 2.6 million in DFW projects over this 5-year window. If we may do more, but this is kind of assuming that. So those kind of the revenue assumptions. The expense assumptions, which is the big category. Now the model assumes that for the budget, we only gave like a 1% COLA for 2021. The model assumes that we're going to do a 3.5% annual COLA for employees. So the model assumes this. So you can see how the figures work their way through with that assumption. Obviously, we can change it, but I wouldn't think the district would want to do a 1% COLA for the next 5 years. That may be kind of tough, but it does assume a 3.5. The merits, the model.
Question. So is that the COLA, is that 3.5% per year plus 2.5% per year? I know that the merits don't affect the entire workforce, but because some people are at the top of the scale, but is that correct that these are per year figures?
You are absolutely correct. The merits on the whole as a district. So as people step through their salary scales, as a whole, we pay about 2.5% of increases in salaries on a whole. We do that on a whole throughout the district. Not everybody, some people are at the top of it,
Right.
But when employees retire, the person we bring back in, they're going to be at a lower, they're going to have to step through theirs, all of that. But you are correct. These are annual percentage assumptions. And so that's...
Sorry, and on the COLA, is that 3.5%, is that what you would say is historically what the district has done is 3.5%? You're
very correct. Before COVID hit, we were getting anywhere from a 3 to 3.5% COLA every year.
Okay.
Since I've been here. So
Thank you.
When we're assuming now that that COVID is going to be kind of under control, and therefore, costs will kind of go back to their normal level. So
we also, directors, we wanted to be a bit more conservative on this particular number as well. We took a look at some of the sister agencies around. Some of them we were unable to find some of their most recent MOUs where most of this is discussed. But in particular, at PCWA, there's, they've got COLAs sitting now for the next couple years anyway that are anywhere from a floor of 2 and up to a ceiling of 6% in their signed MOUs that just begin this year and into the next few years. So again, just kind of trying to be conservative on putting a number in here and seeing where we might land.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. The benefits, this percentage is 4% increase. This is kind of based upon what we've seen it historically. This is health, dental, vision, life. So we kind of typically expect a 4% annual increase in our benefits. The next section, the retirement, this is PERS. And so PERS, this is the percentage of salary that we kind of expect. This is taken directly from our latest actuarial report. And so PERS is typically going to run about 38, 37% of salary. This is for our retirement, our PERS retirement. The next line, the OPEB, other post-employee benefits. This is the funding of our OPEB trust. And this is a good thing. We're almost done funding this trust. We got about 8 years left. And once this trust is fully funded, it'll be like $25 million. Essentially, the district can take that trust and pay its or either contribute against its annual healthcare PERS premium. So essentially, the district can use that trust to significantly reduce its operating expenses once that trust is fully funded, and it's almost there. So on the next 5-year window, the next time we do rates, right? These rates are for a 5-year guide. The next 5-year window, that's gonna come into play in terms of how the district wants to use that trust money. That's gonna come into play.
That $2,205,000 per year, that would be the money, we don't have to fund that.
Exactly. That's the total amount that we're gonna fund over the 5 years, 2.2 million.
Oh, the total
You
of
said it's
5
got
years.
eight years left.
Yeah, but we only got 8 years left. So after this 5-year window, the next 5-year forecast is going to play into how much the district wants to use that trust to offset its healthcare premiums.
Okay.
And so that'll play into the next one. The O&M section, this was a section of expenses where we kept the O&M at the 2021 budget level, and we only increased for an inflation rate. So I just give you a connection on this. Go to the water fund, so you can see the connection, and we go up a little bit to the O&M category. Go down just a little bit. There we go. Other O&M. Now, Director Hall, that figure we're talking about is the 10.46 million for the 2021 budget.
Mhm.
What we're saying is that we're keeping that number flat. The only thing we're increasing it for is for inflation. That assumption, you just have to think about what we're saying. We're saying that the way we're doing O&M now, the level that we're running with, we can run with that same level for 5 years, but only increase for inflation. It may or may not be a good assumption, or it may be. You see how much we spent in O&M in 2020? How much did we spend in O&M in 2020?
9.3 million.
Now, ask yourself, was that representative? That's a COVID year. Was that representative of how much O&M we're going to actually do? Probably not. But what I'm saying is, so we got to keep an eye on that O&M figure. That figure may be closer to 12 million once we get fired up and COVID is under control, right? And we're doing our O&M.
More stuff.
So that's all. COVID wasn't a good year because it could get a bad signal if you're thinking that that's all you're going to spend.
Right.
Because a lot of work didn't happen. So in any event, the model is only.
Oh, sorry.
No. I said in any event, the model is running at the 2021 budget level of O&M.
So my question is, and probably isn't going to be answered now, but I think some future discussion around this point that you're making, Marvin, would be very helpful, because I think the board, based on our discussions around the Ag Water Master Plan, has an interest in investing in technology and approaches that would allow us to better manage our water flow, and then, perhaps modernize some of the things. And I'm not sure if that falls under capital or O&M, but I think that we could use more conversation around here to make sure that Chip has the funding he needs to be able to really manage the system in the most efficient way possible, and that we're looking in a futuristic way. And I don't know if that's in that budget or not. And the combination of the capital and the O&M.
All right.
That's a good
question.
It's a good question.
So I can speak to the operations budget, Director Hull. We have a mix of both. So anything over 5,000, we generally consider as a capitalized, and we'll budget it as such. But if we can do improvements that are under that threshold, we just include it in our normal O&M budget. And generally every year we try to budget for at least 3 SCADA automated stations to be installed, and we try to include those in just our O&M budget. But full-on gauging station rebuilds are capital.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I could see, Director Hall, over time, like what we're doing with the new SETARU program coming on board, and all of our new reporting systems coming on board, there's going to be a lot of benefit to reduce O&M as those systems come online. You know, as more automation comes online, more
Right.
routine maintenance is happening, you will see the economies of scale over time, right, Chip? Like I said, that's the O&M. So if we go back to the assumptions page. Debt service. So this debt service here, 37.75, we're essentially saying that if we do issue the other $83 million in debt, including what we've already have outstanding, we will service about $37.5 million in debt over this 5-year window. So I'll kind of show you how that breaks out. Click on the water tab. Go on the debt service tab. Debt service coverage. One right to the left. There we go. Okay, now open this guy up a little bit. Okay, so now this guy here is set up to comply with the bond covenants. The bond covenants that when we issue our debt, they have certain rules in it that we have to comply with. So the top of this schedule, if we go to the top of this schedule shows you all of the sources that we can use to service debt, according to the rules. So when we issue our bond documents, right, we can use all of these sources to service debt. Are we going to use all of these sources to service debt? We may not. So what we're doing is we're complying with a bond covenant that says that all the sources you have, you must have a debt coverage ratio of at least this or you're out of compliance. Now, the expenses associated with this covenant are only the operating expenses because the rules are saying essentially that you don't have to do any capital projects if you don't want to. We know that's probably not the real world, but that's just the way a lot of these little covenants work. So we just comply with them. So these are the revenue sources for all of our debt. And these are the operating expenses, all of our debt. So we scroll down a little bit. And this is the debt that we could possibly issue over the next 5 years. You see the first line that says 2021 revenue bonds. We have not issued those bonds. This would be the debt service on the new debt, $83.5 million. It will require about $4.4 million a year. And that $4.4 million will be paid through the hydro fund. So now, interesting, this schedule here shows you the debt coverage ratio will be as low as what?
1.79.
1.8. So you got to be careful with that. The bond document says we are okay as long as we can show 1.25. So you still want to be careful with how low that number goes. That number there is increased by external revenue sources like rates. That number is increased if you lower the expenses, or that number is increased if you don't issue as much debt. So there are some variables that can move that number around. Those are the numbers. But as you can see, the district can legally take $83.5 million in leverage and still have about 1.7 for 2 years. Those 2 years are only because hydro's power is being is not coming in. Because when hydro's power comes back in, the ratio goes up in 2026 of what?
2.8.
2.9. So I wouldn't be too alarmed about going down because it's not systematic, it's not systemic. It's just
2 years.
it's just an aberration of having to do that, and then it goes back up.
Does this number influence the ability to bond? Is that one of the key indicators for the bonding agencies?
Yes. This number, the bonding agencies will look at. They will also look at your reserves. Yeah, and this number and your days of cash that you can cover operating. It's a metric in here. We'll look at that too. But these are little metrics the bond guys look at. But we're at AA+. So I mean, we're a doubly plus, so we're still strong. So that's so we go back to the assumptions.
Can I stay here for just a sec?
Oh yeah, go back.
The thing that kind of I wonder about is, again, we have the CIP for water, and the bond issuance for 2023-24 is only has the Lake Wildwood water treatment plant from the water side being funded. So if there are other capital projects that need to be funded through debt service, we don't, there's a debt service coverage issue here. And so again, not for necessarily having to get in the weeds here now, but I really would like to see how is water's capital needs going to be met, either through that annual allocation of around $11 million.
Okay.
Or are we going to need debt issuance? So I just want to, at some point we'll put a little stamp on it, says they're good, they don't need any more money, or they do, and so we have a little challenge. Yeah.
That's a good point. If we go in that little new debt tab again, the new debt tab, as you pointed out, we're allocating water about $11 million a year for their capital needs. Obviously, if we determine that over this window we would have to issue debt for water, we would probably have to back off of some of this 83.4 for other reasons.
Right.
Yeah. So we got some great funding sources, and we can take quite a bit of leverage. So we just have to move the variables around.
Right. But there's a trickle down effect. If we have the need to fund more water projects from debt service out of that $83.5 million bond issuance, then we are going to still have to fund the hydro projects, and that's going to need to come out of their reserves, which they have ample of at the moment. But you see the downward trajectory on the hydro's bond reserves. And so I just think we have to really be careful about how we put the whole picture together so that we don't get ourselves in a pickle, not being able to fund water's capital or decreasing hydro's reserves to a level where we're not comfortable. That is definitely things the board will keep an eye on, because as you pointed out, over this 5-year window, we don't know if we're going to have to spend the 42 for the permanent license, and then there would free up $42 million for water's new debt, or we might have to. So there are variables that we have to keep in mind. But like Greg pointed out, once we finish the model and we do the rates, the annual rates, every year the board adopts the budget, right? The board can choose to adopt the full rate every year or less of the rate. So the board is not locked in once they accept the 5-year. Only thing they're locked in is that they can't go over the recommended rates. They're not locked into it, though.
I think if I can, maybe go off on a sort of some form of a tangent, but I think that one of the, and Director Hull, your comment made me think about this, and it seems to be kind of a recurring concept that I don't know if we solve it today or think about it, but as we look at this debt service of $83.5 million, I think there's a lot of focus on saying, well, that's hydro. And what we're talking about is a rates committee on rates for our water department, our water customers. I think what we have to, there's times it's a very schizophrenic organization in that we need to define things as hydro specific, but then at other times we need to define them as overall district wide.
That's right.
These investments although they are pertaining to hydroelectric activities district-wide, if it were not for, say, all of these 7 projects or whatever that were up here, it would completely affect the ratepayers and the water customer. And there is a relationship between the investments that the district makes in the hydroelectric that are not completely a zero-sum game for the water ratepayers, right? So I just want to make that comment because I do feel like there's been sort of a conversation around, and maybe that's just kind of defining it and talking about it and thinking about it in various ways, but these investments of $83.5 million, although there is only one project on here that you would quote-unquote say is water only. It's a treatment plan, and clearly you can define that, boom, that is to supply treated water to the customers that pay out of the Lake Wildwood treatment plant zone. But the rest of the investments here, were it not for those, the water would have a difficult time making it to the Lake Wildwood treatment plant. Were it not for the investment and the activities of the hydroelectric department upstream of what we've said before, like everything below Rawlins and Rawlins and Scotts Flat, the hydroelectric department pretty much commits its operations and maintenance to the upper division. Marvin does have a slide and some conversations on what that relationship is and how those costs overlap what's spent, and so that's important to know. But I just wanted to, because not to take away from the thought that, yeah, these are, spillways and dam scours and FERC requirements, but there is the benefit that in doing those processes in these projects, were it not for the hydroelectric work that is in the upper division, the water customers and the water department would be paying for all of those upper division activities.
I think we had that discussion about what is that value plus the transfer in value for each year. What is that value? Is pretty large. It's a pretty big number, right?
Yeah. We have a shared research tab, Director Hall, that we will take you through. And I can just touch on it now, and we will. We'll have to get into we will just touch on it now. But what this research tab shows you is that the benefit of the water customers for having hydro, and then it also shows you the benefit of hydro and recreation for having water, because it goes both ways. I'll just touch on the one item that Greg was mentioning. This is getting the water to Scotts Flat and Cumbie, because obviously you got to get the water out the higher reservoirs to be able to get them down through the system into the treatment plants. And so Ken and I we did an analysis looking at the cost of labor, materials, and FERC compliance and all of these rules. And so essentially what we came up with is that line where you see hydroelectric water to Scotts Flat and Cumbie, you see that $7.5 million.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it will cost if you didn't have the hydroelectric division. That's what it would cost.
The water would cost
annually to be able to just produce your water. And so that's a combination of different people. That's a combination of different expenses, and we have a spreadsheet that links these costs to the accounts, and we looked at it from a budget perspective. We didn't just throw that number up there. So, also too, we were fair. We looked at what water, you can kind of think about what water would save if it didn't have to produce overhead for hydro and for a rec. And this number here, you can look at this number. See the number where it says dispersing estimate, right? See that 2.8 million and that 3.3 million?
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially what water would save if it didn't have to work for those other divisions, like all of the payroll for hydro, IT, all of the oversight for recreation as well. So when you look at the net effect, if you sum those two numbers, the 22.1 less the 3.3, water would have to come up with about $18 million annually, essentially, to operate.
See, I don't really, I mean, I know I'm new to the board, so I don't have certainly all the history of the conversation. But to me, we're an integrated district, and we, in none of my comments do I mean to imply that we should be doing anything to 86 hydro. I'm not suggesting that at all.
Okay.
I want to be super clear, all the hydro people who might be listening there, I'm not suggesting that. I think this is an interesting point of discussion, but the same could be said when we talk about, well, if we didn't have hydro, this is what it would cost water. But we could also say if we only had hydro, they would have those costs. So I'm not sure exactly what point should be drawn here with especially the $7.5 million. Clearly, the budget subsidies, the interest earnings, I get that. Those are direct benefits that, particularly the budget subsidy. I mean, that's just really obvious that helps water. But I'm not sure why we would even be talking about the cost of the system if water were going alone. I mean, we're not going alone, and nor would I ever think we would.
So the thought on this, Director Hull, was simply that in the past when we've looked at rates, all we've looked at was a direct linkage subsidy from hydroelectric to the water department, which is that $6 million, right? And we hear in the public that, well, hydro was created in the 60s in order to, it was stated in the books to pay for to pay for the water ratepayers so that their rates will be low all the time. And so we hear this, and then at the same breath we say, we hear, so why are you raising my rates, right? I mean, this is there's a constant back and forth on, well, what is hydro doing? Hydro should be doing more. What this is really an academic exercise to try to quantify the additional value that hydroelectric brings to the water ratepayers. That's all this was. This isn't about the budget process and how it works, and we certainly, no one's assuming or implying that we're going to remove hydroelectric from the system at all. But that's what this exercise was for Marvin and his team to come up with. Really, what is a true amount of subsidy that the district as a whole brings to the water ratepayer, and that's how this came about.
I'll note that all the discussion, but thank you, Marvin, for doing this. We didn't have this previously. The discussion around FERC relicensing being horribly expensive. What if we didn't? We some of us said, what if we eliminate power production? And that got into a big can of worms discussion. But it brought up this question: what are these costs? And so this has been really an eye opener for all of us to see both sides of this picture. And I think you're absolutely right that we need to be doing that, and it's still going to be an ongoing discussion. Marvin, do you know in the capital improvement list is that FERC number includes a new power plant at Rawlins? Was that the total or not?
No, I don't think the capital improvement program includes that estimate of building a new power plant.
Okay, because that's a question.
I think it does.
There's a big chunk in there.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this is a great. This shared resource, I think, is a great is a good picture, gives a better picture of how that all works together.
Yeah, so Greg is correct. This analysis was not to do anything other than just to point out how the resources are shared amongst the particular funds. And you're correct, Director Hall. The district as a whole, but it does just show, how the sharing of resources is happening. The district gets aware of that happening. So we'll go back to the assumptions tab. And okay, that was the debt service line item that we kind of stopped at. The fixed assets is the other category. And what this is essentially saying is that we're going to run at the 2021 fixed asset level, just only with an inflation adjustment. That may or may not be that's the assumption we have. We have to be careful that we are not delaying fixed asset purchases too long, but we do have, if you click on the water tab now, you get a relation to the number. You see the fixed assets we spent in 2020. How much did we spend in 2020 in the water fund?
1.2 million.
How much did we spend in the budget number?
732,000.
So what they're saying is that we can run at that level for 5 years. That may not be a good assumption. So as we dig into these, you'll see that some of these numbers may be a little soft, or some may be, they may be a little hard, but you can kind of see how they work. So we go back to the assumptions tab.
So can I ask Marvin, on fixed assets, is that things like new vehicles, or, what would be included in a fixed asset that's not part of capital or another line item?
That's a good question. Your fixed assets are your purchased vehicles and trucks, backhoes, things like this.
Okay.
We don't include them into the capital budget because you don't need the fixed asset itself is going to be used long after that capital project is done. So the fixed asset will be replacing your vehicles, purchasing new trucks, backhoes, things like this. We cut that budget in half almost. So we might need to increase that realistically, but now that's just where we are.
Yeah, we said that number is not sustainable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a number that may have to go up a little bit. The transfer outs is essentially just the transfer outs of hydro into the water fund and into the recreation fund. The debt service transfer out, that $22 million, we spoke about that. That is the amount of property taxes that we will use to service the debt in the operating fund. Now, here you go. Your capital projects. Over the 5-year window, we will do how much in capital projects?
158 million.
That's a lot of capital projects.
Yeah,
So what I'm saying is that between that big number, we can move that number around in terms of what projects we do for water and what projects we do for hydro. We can move that number around. This model is just showing that the district can take that level of capital project spending over the 5-year window.
We can afford to.
We can afford it. There you go. You can afford to do it. So we can move that number around as we need to.
And Chip, if you could interject right here on this subject, because I know that Karen and Laura too are concerned about the health of our water system, right? Yeah. And getting a handle on that. And I'm not sure I even have a handle on where we stand capital improvement-wise with, say, for instance, South Yuba Canal, right? and just your philosophical interjection right here on that subject.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I think from our budgeting perspective, and I say it's a combination between operations, maintenance, and engineering. We all get together, we discuss our CIP program, we discuss our future projects, and we discuss priorities, and we do that on a regular basis. I think that this budget shows you that with the $11 million that we are including in every year's budget for normal CIP, we feel like most of our projects are in the smaller sized category and they will fit in that envelope. They'll be covered by those funds, is what I'm trying to say. The big projects, and they just so happen to be, a lot of them are hydroelectric.
Right.
They're too big, and so they're in that bonding category. But again, circling back, we feel like that $11 million covers a lot of the projects that are on our books for R&R type projects, repair and replacement.
So new concrete head structure for a canal or something.
Yes, so that's a great example, encasement of a very bad section of canal, that can be covered by that $11 million. And the E. George to Lake Wildwood BEP, I know it's a little questionable in the air still, but you'll notice it's not on that bonding package. It's been scratched because we anticipate, well, we'll spread that out over multiple years and just utilize our capital budget to get it done. Exactly. We won't bond for it because we can go the other route. So it is something we discuss on a regular basis, and
today we're laying pipe on Ridge Road.
Yeah, and that's a great example of R&R, right? So that is being covered through our capital program.
So I guess the bigger philosophical question is how bad a shape is the system, or how good a shape is the system? Where does it fall budget-wise?
So that's $1 million question.
It is $1 million.
Probably multi-million-dollar question.
$1 million. Because you've been doing this for a long time, right?
Yeah, I will say, I think our team has a pretty good handle on the facilities that need immediate attention, but I am looking forward to better tools in our toolbox with the CMMS program to help us track that in a better form. Right now we use a lot of institutional knowledge, and that helps, but really tracking it in an electronic computerized maintenance system program will be super helpful. So that's kind of where we're at. I will also say that a lot of our system was put in the same time frame. For instance, the water treatment systems, it really came about in the late 60s. And they all kind of got put in at the same time, and so they're all going to kind of fall apart at the same time. So that's something we're aware of, and we're watching it. But yeah, that's what our ongoing capital project discussions entail.
So then looking forward to what we've been talking about, the new technology stuff that's expensive, and how do we just start putting that in the budget a little at a time, and because that's not a capital improvement. If we went a big way, that would have to be a bonding type thing to do that stuff. And then where's the cost benefit ratio of that? Is my question, right? Because I'm not opposed to it, but it certainly needs to show a bigger benefit than we realize today. So, well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I would request that at some point we have the ability to look at this from a holistic point of view, to be able to see, Chip, what projects you would propose funding with your 11 million per year that's in this model, and what projects, if any, don't get funded in that model. And I know that the CIP, I'm sure, is a dynamic document, and you have things that you insert there as a higher priority. But I would just like to see a holistic look at the capital investments required and appropriate in both hydro, water, and rec, just so we see, okay, that CIP, we've got it all covered, or we're taking things off the plate, whatever it may be. So it doesn't have to be now, of course, and it doesn't need to be next week, but at some point.
Yeah, that's fair enough, and I'll add that we do have the capital improvement list that has the priorities in the top 5, but it is a living document, and as things fall apart that we may or may not have been aware of, that list tends to shuffle a little bit. But your point's well taken, and I think we do need to sit down and have that meeting at some point and inform everyone of the projects that are on there and the priorities of them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the other thing, going back to an earlier point that was made about customer perceptions, I think that we have to do the job of explaining this to the public, and I know you do, so I'm not suggesting we're not doing it at all. I'm just saying that I think the typical customer does not understand we need to be spending $11 million minimum in order to have a reliable water system, both on treated and raw water. And we've got to tell that story. Here's what we did this year for investments. And I know we do a very good job with the big projects, but I think, anyway, I think as board members, we need to be out with our constituents saying, this is where the district is investing, and here's what we continue to need to invest in.
Yeah, I think Director Holder, like Chip was mentioning, our new asset management system is going to be pretty robust. So you'll be able to kind of see the infrastructure at more of a detailed way. You're kind of going to have a good understanding of the age of the infrastructure and the amount that it has been depreciated. So you can be able to see the useful life of it. You can't really see a lot of that now. You know, I look at it though. I do look at the total investments we have, and I look at the total accumulated depreciation. So obviously, if your accumulated depreciation is as big as your investment, your system doesn't have any economic life left. So I do look at those things as a whole. Just don't point them out, but I do look at them.
Thank you.
Okay, so the staffing level, the staffing level, we scroll down a little bit. The staffing level is running at the budget, the 2021 level, and this is a good assumption. I don't reduce the staffing level unless we believe over the next 5 years we're going to have a significant change in employees. This might need to increase. I think Ken was saying, depending upon how the FERC deal goes, you might have to hire more people. Yeah. But for now, I didn't put them into the model.
Yeah, FERC is, it's a moving target.
Yeah, this is a 5-year window. We may not even have to do the permanent FERC over this 5-year window. We may have to tackle it the next 5-year window. So this is a moving guy. So these are the assumptions that are feeding the numbers. So as we kind of look at the numbers, you can kind of reflect upon the assumptions. The revenue requirements tab, this tab here, the next tab is, and we'll increase this guy. This is where a lot of those assumptions kind of flow through. This starts with the total requirement for the 5 years. This is essentially the total operating budget. So if you click into that cell that says 42.8 million, you just click there. The next guy, the 2022. Yeah, if you click that guy, you can see it's a formula. So this is essentially the total requirement for the water fund over the next 5 years. So you start with your total requirement. That total requirement is your total budget. And remember, we just reviewed all of the expense assumptions. So obviously, if you change some of those assumptions, this requirement would change. Now you look at the other sources other than water rates. So these are the other sources we're going to use to offset your total requirement. The other sources amount to 14.3 million. Look at the other sources we're using. See the investments. Prior to this year, all the investment income was used for capital projects. We moved that up here now. So we've moved up a lot of other sources to offset rates. You know, when I first got here, Rem and I, when we were doing this model, all of the investment income was down at the capital project level. Right. And now we moved it up so that we want to try to offset rates as much as possible. And then you look at the water rates. This is the revenue coming from the water rates. These water rates are essentially assuming from the percentage increases. So if you go into the assumptions tab real quick and you go up to the top, you can see the water rates then is driving those revenue figures. So we go back over to the revenue requirement. And then, now, this next section here says water rate recovery. we'll spend a little time here so you can understand how the model is taking into considerations of the board guidance, as well as using our 2020 historical cost estimate. So right now, these percentages, what this is saying is that the treated water revenue recovery, we will receive 68.9% of water revenue from the treated customer. And right now, it's saying the raw portion will be 31%. When we look over to the left, you see where it says revenue water recovery percentages? That 66% is what we believe the treated customers should be paying, and raw should be paying 34%. We will get into those details in a minute. Right underneath that, you see the base rate recovery percentage. With our current structure, we will recover about 47% of the base rate revenue of all of the water revenue. 47% will be coming in through the base rate. 53% will be coming in through the usage rate. However, the board has gave us direction for what? 50-50. So obviously, we're going to have to tweak to make sure that we can get to that. So go on the waterway percentage little worksheet. It's all the way over to the right.
A quick question, Marvin. Have you modeled what it would be if we do that recovery percentage at 66 and 34? How that and what it means for the rate increases for raw? I'm sure you have this in here, and probably we'll get to it. Sorry.
No, you're correct. We're going to get to it. We'll show you how just changing some of the percentages and how we'll continue to line it up. We're just explaining now that the 66 and the 34 is based upon the methodology given from the board.
Okay.
So if we click that little worksheet that says WRC percentage, yes, we open this guy. What this is this. This is making sure that our rates and the recovery percentages for the treated and raw customers is based upon direction from the board. The board gave us direction that when we recover our costs, we should recover using certain allocation bases. One of the bases the board says use is the 2020 cost of service analysis that has just been done for us. Another basis the board says use is the number of accounts. And so this shows you how we're coming up with it. So where you see support departments, 19.4 million. These are, think of this as your overhead departments. These are departments that are not directly related to a treated or a raw customer. So these are your support departments. In other words, I couldn't directly relate my time to a treated or raw, and neither could Greg. So these are support departments. And you can see almost half of the budget is what? Support departments. So if we scroll down, it'll stop right there. The total budget for 2021 was $40.4 million, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The support department is almost half. So the district has a lot of overhead costs, and this is fine because we're a service industry. We don't produce a widget, so that's fine. That's normal for service industry. So if you scroll up to the top a little bit, what we're determining is that the allocation base to spread the support department costs should not be the percent of time for guys in the field. So for chips and maintenance in certain departments, so we scroll down a little bit, the delivery departments. The delivery departments are departments that are in the field, and they can directly relate their time to either a treated or raw system. And so those departments, it doesn't make sense to use the same methodology to spread those costs, right? Doesn't make that sense. And so having said that, this is how we come up with it, this direction from the board. So we scroll up a little bit. The allocate support departments. We're using the number of accounts to spread those costs to treated and raw customers. So treated has about 19.4 million 1,000 accounts. RAW has about 5. Therefore, treated's portion of cost that they're going to cover, the treated customer, is how much? 15.3 million.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're just kind of showing you the math. Okay, now the delivery departments. These are departments here that are based upon the Bartle Wells analysis for us. Bartle Wells did a 3-year analysis from fiscal year 17-19 in terms of the costs, and Chip and I went through that massive spreadsheet, and we determined, based upon the projects and the facilities, who was consuming what. So after we did that, we determined that the treated customer was consuming 54% of that cost, and the raw customers was consuming 46%. Therefore, we allocate the delivery department's cost based upon that study. Now, that was not a full cost of service study. It was only looking at historical costs, right? It's not looking at forecasted costs. It's only looking at historical. So history, you know, is what we only have to go with when we forecast. Now, considering that, here is where everything comes together. The allocated operations budget. So we click that 26.6 million. That is a formula. What that is saying is that it's summing the treated cost for the overhead, and it is summing the treated cost for the delivery. And then when you click on the 66%, it is telling you that that represents 66% of the overall budget. Therefore, that 66% is what the treated customer should be paying. And the 34% is what the raw customer should be paying after all the other revenue sources. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Director Hall, does that make sense?
No, she's muted.
I think she's muted a little bit, huh?
There I go. I'm sorry.
Okay. This is probably her first time. That's her first time looking.
Yes, first time she's seen.
Yeah.
So, okay, so I'm trying to think how to articulate this question. So in the allocate delivery department, so that's the operations, water operations, maintenance, and vegetation. So when they're, and their work, is that work exclusively to the, I think you call it the lower part of the system? So in other words, they're not spending, that water delivery department staff is not spending any time in the high country doing maintenance of the facilities at recreation facilities or canals or anything else. Is that correct?
So that's partially correct. I think the point we need to highlight on this one is that when those crews are doing work out in the field, they're charging their time and their efforts to a specific facility. And then we divvy out those funds based on the facility they charge their time to. So even if they do work in the hydro area, they're charging to a hydro facility, and it pulls from the budget accordingly. So that particular box is actual cost based on what we lived for those 3 years per facility. It's very specific.
Yeah, it's pretty specific, Director. It was about 200,000 records, right, Chip, that we looked through. 200,000 records over a 3-year period. So we have it's a good enough representation of what the treated facility was consuming and what the raw was consuming of the operating budget. Bear in mind, this is not capital projects, and this is nothing to do with facilities that they didn't charge. So it's facilities that they charged. So, you know, we know that.
So there's some that they didn't.
Yeah, there's some that they perhaps didn't charge, but this is everything that they charged. So when we look at everything that we charged, this is the percentage that we came up with over the 3-year average.
So
when we look at that,
I don't
I know it's kind of a little fuzzy unless you're looking at the actual details. But you
I'll
just,
let you look
know.
at the 200,000 records. I won't do that.
No.
I wanted to really understand just to clarify. So we do have water staff who do some work in the high country, and they record their time against that effort. And I'm assuming, based on the conversation, that staff time for that work is reduced, so that the figures we see here do not reflect the labor costs and benefits, et cetera, for that staff doing work in the high country. The level of numbers that are presented here take the total cost and subtract out the work such as Chip identified, high country work.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, that is correct. As a whole, the percentage, 54% for treated, 46% for raw. As a whole, that percentage is going to be a good representation for that 3-year window. It's going to be a good representation.
Yeah, no, I believe that, and I mean, I really admire the analytical effort to, get a very precise number. That was a huge amount of work to do that, and a lot of, the conscientiousness of staff to be recording their time in this way. That's not always kind of where staff want to spend their time working, not recording time. So I appreciate the diligence and the commitment to this, because that's what allows you to be able to do the analysis.
Well,
I just wanted to really make sure that, I just wanted to clarify those, labor, but go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. The district was pushed pretty hard last go around on not having a detailed representation of how much time staff was spending at a particular facility. So we made a very conscious effort to push this and to get this detail in the last few years. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that this is solely for facilities that are below Scotts Flat and Rollins.
Okay.
Right? The other amount of work that, if maintenance staff gets called to fix and gets called up to the upper division to help with something, or into the rec facility to help with something. The shared resources tab that we saw earlier helps offset and cover those costs. That's where those time efforts are detailed.
Okay.
So they're captured in this whole process, but they're just not in this percentage allocation that you see here.
Okay, thank you.
So this analysis here, and we'll go back to the revenue requirements tab. That analysis there supports that 66% and 34% that you see on the left. The detailed analysis supports those percentages, and they should, because it's how that we're recommending that you charge certain groups of customers, so it should support it. So be that as it is, right now the way our rates are, the assumptions that are there, we can change the assumptions. The treated water customer will be paying slightly more than what they should, and the raw water customer will be paying slightly less than what they should. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then obviously the revenue recovery methodology would have to change slightly to get to the 50-50 level. So, but it's still not far off from it. So that being the case, those are all the assumptions for requirement. Now we look at the reserve impact. So we go to the water tab. So we look at the water tab right next to it, and we scroll down a little bit, and this is, and keep going down. Okay. Okay, there we go. So this is where everything comes together. So as we change the revenue assumption, expense assumptions, and we've looked at the methodology of how the costs are going to be recovered between the customers, this is the result. The results aren't bad. I mean, the results are that if we keep that percentage increase to the customers, these will be the reserve impacts, you know, with the COLAs and spending that much in capital projects, all the things that we just went to. This is the cash result. The days cash on hand, this is a metric that the bond guys look at. It's still strong. That essentially tells you, you know, how many times you can fund operations. The debt service coverage ratio, remember you mentioned that. We had the tab there that shows you that you were still, the lowest point you would go to about 1.8. So this is the result of all of that. So this is the model that we will provide as the informational thing to the board. So what we would do at this point, we would go to the assumptions tab, and we would see
Mark, hold on 1 second before you go there. Go back to that. What's our target? I mean, we really don't want to get below.
Oh, yes.
Well, I was gonna ask the same question, the reserve target?
Yeah.
The reserve target.
The reserve target that the bond guys have kind of told us is to stay above 50 million in unrestricted reserves. So we are doing good here. We only get to 58 in 2025.
And that's total. That's
That's
district-wide.
total. Yeah, when the bond guys look at us, remember, when we issue bonds, we're posting all district revenues. So we're looking at all district reserves. And we just have to stay above 50 for them not to try and downgrade our debt. That's what they've hinted at. Yeah, that's what they've told. They've hinted at that, Marvin. The district would do well to stay above 50 million. Yeah.
So now's the time you get to
Now's the time where we
play within the sandbox.
We can play in the sandbox now by moving some of the variables around and seeing where we are with the assumptions. So we look at the assumptions tab. Now is the time where the Water Rate Committee can play with some of these assumptions to see where they feel comfortable with the resulting reserves, the resulting debt service coverage, you know. And then obviously once we do that, this is the model that we will give to the board.
So when do we see a chart, the famous little chart that shows how much a month the treated water bill goes?
Customer impacts?
Yeah.
So we go to the treated water tab.
Because, okay, if you do.
There we go. Open this guy up.
35 over 5 years.
Okay.
Throw up their hands.
This is where the numbers.
This is where the magic happens. Director will go, Bureau can say, let me see the magic. Okay, so
Here's the magic.
the little blue row where it says customer impacts.
Yeah.
Okay, this is essentially saying right now our base rate for our customer for treated water, average customer, 5'8" guy, his base rate is $31.35 a month. With the typical increases we were in the model now, remember they're just assumptions.
Right.
You can see the amount of the increase for that customer every month.
So the $2.19, that's a base rate per
month.
For the first year.
Yep. That's per year.
And then it goes up a little bit.
Goes up every year.
The blue line is the difference between 2022 and 2021.
Mm-hmm. And now bear in mind that the treated customer should be paying slightly less to get to that percentage. So that's another consideration that we will look at. You can look at the commodity rate, the Tier 1, about $2.42 for Tier 1. It will go up 17 cents. That's Tier 1.
Right.
And you can look at Tier 2. You go down a little bit to Tier 2. So we scroll down a little bit to Tier 2. There you go. Tier 2 would go up a little bit higher because our rates are structured to encourage conservation.
Right.
So.
And then you have the same chart for raw water?
Yeah, so we go into raw water. So we go to the raw water tab, and then we open that guy up. Wall router, the customer impacts for their base rate. The wall routers, they pay their base rate once for summer, right, Chip, and once for winter, if they need both. Is that correct, Chip? I think it is.
The base rate is for seasonal, the other folks pay their annual.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple different categories,
But the bulk of the customers, they will pay a seasonal base rate if they want summer water, and a seasonal base rate if they want winter water.
Yep.
Okay, and so that base rate would go up about $40 a month. You can see that blue line.
Not a month,
Excuse me, per season.
one time.
One time,
Right. There you go, one time. And then you can see the miners inches. This is one that I think a lot of people are a little bit concerned on this guy here.
Right.
You can see for a guy who's buying 5 minor inches or 10 minor inches per miner's inch, that's maybe a little steep.
And that brings up the subject of volumetric, or the volume chart. The price goes down per inch, or has been in the past, or not?
It's a result of the amount you buy. So the more you buy, the more it dilutes the base rate.
How it dilutes the base rate.
Which is that conversation, the first miner's inch is always the most expensive.
Most expensive one.
Because you pay the base rate.
Right.
You buy 10 miner's inches, the base rate is,
So we can come up with a chart. I can come up with a chart that shows that, or say a guy like me that's buying 29 inches of water, right? Take my base rate, less than 29 inches of water, bam, here's what it costs per inch of water.
Exactly.
Correct.
Exactly.
Okay, we don't have that kind of, we're not showing that kind of chart.
No.
we don't have that here yet.
Okay.
It's a good thought, it's a good thought as
Because
a
that's-
communication tool.
Ding, ding, that's where I'm going. When I go communicate with customers,
Yeah.
this is the stuff I wanna show them, not the 35% they're gonna pay over 75 years. I mean, they're gonna figure that one out.
They're gonna figure it out.
That's the one they're gonna use.
Yeah.
This is the one I'm gonna use.
Yeah. Well,
Talk to-
it's
because
true.
It's talk about budgeting per month. It's like buying a car.
It's the pocketbook
What's
number.
the payment gonna be per month, right?
So let's look at Marvin's been, thank you, Marvin, for walking us through this for the last 2 hours. Director Hull, do you wanna keep going? I mean, we can jump in, I think we should jump into these assumptions and make some sandbox plays to see what happens to these numbers. If you wanna do that,
So like we did before, we plugged in, when I first came to advisory committee meetings, we just kept plugging in the 5 to 10% number.
Yeah,
We
I mean,
argued those
I think we
back
should show you how the change happens when you look at a percent, increase. Clearly, we're gonna be bringing this to the full board next week. We wanted you to see this, though, with the new baseline, assumed cash assumption and what it's been doing. So maybe we can go to the assumptions and then pop back into
The impact of it. Yeah.
see what, an adjustment to the treated and raw rate percentages might be.
So,
So I have a question about that, the base, back to the base, because that's the same percentage. We talked about getting to 50/50. Do we have to have different numbers, different percentages of the base rate to make that happen?
yeah, so for our first, just kind of like our first little trial, just to see how the workbook works. So, Jeanette, in the treated base rate for 2022, you see, click in that cell. Now, the goal is to get us to 50/50. We know we're not there yet. So the treated base rate, go to 7.5%. Just type in 7.5. Now, the treated usage rate, since we don't want to change the total number of revenue we're getting, change that to 6.5. In other words, all we're doing now is changing the way we're going to recover our revenue.
Right.
Okay.
Because that's also a goal
Yes.
of the board.
Now,
Right.
one of the other goals was that the raw water guy should come up a little in terms of his overall amount that he's paying, right? So the raw water base, let's go to So the treated was 7.5. The water base go to 8%. The water usage, we don't want to change the overall amount. Go to 6%. Okay, now go back to the revenue requirements tab. Now, let's see.
And that just changed all the numbers, right?
That changed the numbers. Okay, the treated customer, we see that he's still paying 68%. So we go back to the assumptions. And underneath the treated base, take that to 6.5. Okay. Usage can stay the same. So we go back to the revenue requirement. Okay, he went down just a little, 6.8. Now, notice in the base rate recovery, we're at 47% now for the base rate recovery and 52 on the other guy. So some of these assumptions, they didn't do a significant change.
Right.
So go back to the assumptions tab. Now, the treated base, go to 8. This guy, go to 4.5. The raw base rate, go to 9. And the usage, go to 5. And now we come back. Okay, so the base rate moved a little and the commodity rate moved a little. Okay, so go back to assumptions. Now, take that 8 all the way across. You can just copy that all the way across. Yes, that guy there. Yep, and copy that 4.5 across. Yep. And then you copy all of the other guys across too. And then this guy. Okay, now we go back. Okay, now we got some movement. So you can see that the treated guy, he came down a little. He was paying 68.8. At the end of it, he's 68.3. You can see the raw guy was paying 31.2. And at the end of it, he's paying 31.7. We have, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you can see how we're getting close to a 50-50. The recovery in the base rate seems to be fine. So now let's go back to the assumptions, and we're going to change the commodity guy. The treated guy at the top, 2022, the treated guy said 8%. Change him to 6%. And take him all the way across. The raw guy in the usage area goes to 7%. And take him all the way across. And now we can see. Okay, we're very close to be able to see that we're compliant. We're close to the recovery percentages. By 2026, the treated customer will be paying what? 66.2. He's only supposed to be paying 66, so he's right there.
Yeah.
The raw guy will be paying about 34% what he should. Now let's look at customer impacts. So we go to the treated tab for customer impacts. So we go up to the top. The treated customer impacts is much less, right?
Right.
And then the commodity impacts is much less. If we look at the raw customer, he's going to be a little bit more. If you go up, see his impact is a little bit more. His base rate for his seasonal amount will go to about $51 for seasonal. And then you look at his minor inches. So it's not obviously.
Where are we with the
reserves?
The reserves.
So we go back to the water tab, and the reserves are still in a good position. By the end of 2026, the reserves will have gone down to about $55 million.
They went down some.
Yeah, they went down some because the treated customer, it accounts for about 68% of all the revenue.
Right.
So as you're giving him more of a discount, to get that reserve back up, the raw guy will have to increase more. But I still think this is an acceptable amount compared to what we would have to have from the external customers. And remember, this is also doing the $150-some million in capital projects, debt service, all the other expenses are in there. Let's look at debt service coverage. Should be, it still holds. It goes, remember underneath the total 7%, it was 1.8.
1.8.
Right now it's about 1.65. Still holds. I wouldn't be too alarmed at those reductions for those 2 years because most of that is hydro revenue that we're not going to get while we were spending the power plant.
So go back to the assumptions again. You know, some of the conversation we're going to have in March with some of the raw water users is, you know, this price elasticity concept.
Right.
And where are they with being able to absorb a greater increase? Because what we're saying here is clearly there needs to be a greater increase in the raw water side than the treated water side. And go to the raw.
Well, first off, the cost of service study shows that, right?
Cost of service shows that.
Right. And so the tab where it shows the actual dollar increase in raw. So so your base rate.
Base rate goes from $570 to $622, and the impact, your base rate goes up $50. Yeah, for seasonal.
$50.
Yeah, $50 for seasonal that year.
And then $23 for the miner's inch guy.
$23 for the minor inch guy. Yeah.
Is that a monthly?
That's how many minor inches.
One time.
That's seasonal, right?
That's seasonal too, because you only pay a seasonal, right, Chip?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but it's like what Director Bill Reagan said. The cost analysis, the historical cost analysis indicates the percentage of cost each customer should be recovering, and we're using the number of accounts for the overhead cost. Those are supported by analysis. If you just go willy-nilly and somebody challenges your rate, the 218 process,
You can't go
I ain't got no analysis to support it.
You can't go willy-nilly with 218, right?
Yeah, you kind of almost got to stick with the analysis that you kind of came up with.
Right.
It just, you know.
We haven't heard from Director Hull for a bit. How you doing over there?
I'm doing good. I want to thank you for this, I think, really exceptional analysis that you've done and the tool that you've created that is really super. And I also appreciate seeing the real dollar impact versus the just the percentage. I think that's a very helpful thing for customers to see. I do think that we have to, particularly with the cost increase on the raw water side, I appreciate the need to rebalance things. So I think the integrity of what we're proposing holds very nicely, and I'm grateful for that. I think that the challenge is kind of the reality. And when we say we're going to increase rates, it looks like we'll probably be somewhere maybe 9% or so for the raw water customers. I think we're going to have a really, if we end up with that kind of cost increase, doesn't really matter what the dollars are, or it does matter, but it's, as you said, Marvin, what people are going to say is it's a 9% increase over 5 years, and that's huge. I also think that the feedback I got as a candidate was that, look, the costs are going up in life generally. So, but we don't see other kinds of organizations having to go up this kind of level of 7 to 9%. And so I think that we as board members really need to understand the drivers for this. And we got to be really working on our communication, whatever the amount of the increase ends up being. We really have to get out there and do the communication and give the full picture of the complicated nature of the district and the need to have investments. And so but I really appreciate the effort and the quality of the work here. It's very apparent.
Thank you. So the percentages, I'd be careful to say that today that is a 9% increase. This is just a box playing around in.
If you go into the assumptions tab, you got to take the average of both. So if you average the raw water base rate and usage, even in this scenario, the average is, was it 8? The average is 8. So because remember, the base rate would be at 7%. The commodity, the base rate would be 9. The usage will be 7. So that's the average of 8. So you don't want to just look at one component of the rate and say that's the increase. You got to look at both components of the rate.
Well, and this is not the increase.
It is not the increase, but
everybody knows this is the sandbox. Back to the original thought. This is we're not.
Yeah.
Today is.
But even that, you don't want to just take one component of the rate and say that's the increase.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But at least
I understand that, but an 8% increase, even in a sandbox, is a very substantial increase for 5 consecutive years. And granted, we are at the beginning of the conversation. I would ask for the following. From what I could see, we do not have a roll-up budget that shows what the combined budgets of hydro, water, and rec, what the bottom line profit and or loss is every year. And I would like to see that. The other thing that when you went to the hydro tab very momentarily to show us something, Marvin, early on, and one of the things I observed is that hydro in several years has a very significant operating loss. And granted, I get that we have the Chicago Park Rewind, but we are creating operating deficits in hydro while shoring up water with hydro money. And that is troublesome to me. I need to understand where those losses are going to be, so that's why I want the roll-up budget. I want to see the bottom line every year for our projected operating profit and loss. And I want to see that hydro, I want to have conversation around the concept that we're taking that level of money out of hydro every year, creating operating losses, and what the impact to hydro's financial health is. So
that's a good concern. I'll speak to it a little bit generally. If you click on the hydro tab, and if you roll down to hydro's net income, scroll up a little bit. Scroll up. Okay, now you can stop right there. Now, you are correct over this 5-year window that we are showing a net income loss over this 5-year window. Remember, it's a 5-year window?
correct.
Now, if you look at the debt service line, you can see that we do have hydro servicing the debt of the new debt, the $4.4 million.
Right.
But if we remove that $4.4 million, hydro would be essentially making money or breaking even over this window. So this is assuming that we will issue the debt. But here's the biggest thing that you probably should be making sure you understand on the Waters tab, if you click the Waters tab, this is essentially a roll-up budget for you. This here unrestricted total, think of this as the results of the roll-up budget for the district over the 5 years. This is what this is saying. This is the district. So over the 5 years, you are correct. Hydro's reserves are being depleted from 54 million going down to about 27 million over this 5-year window. So that is your roll-up budget. That is the result of the district's overall budget over 5 years. This is it.
But it's not a profit and loss summary. And you do that all the time, Marvin. I mean, that's what, all of our operating budgets year end show profit and loss for the district as a whole. That's what I'm asking for. And I appreciate that you have this. I would like to see operating profit and loss as opposed to seeing the unrestricted reserves. I mean, I like to see this, but I want to see that as well.
Yes, and that's not a problem. I can even add a tab that gives you the district-wide summary for these budgets, but these are your budgets. So the 5-year forecast for hydro, that is your budget. And this is the 5-year budget for water. So I can just summarize them. It wouldn't be hard because I got the details of them already right here. And so it could show you district-wide. That wouldn't be hard at all.
Right, perfect. The other thing that is a little bit of a niggly concern for me is in this model, we have issuing hydro debt. So in the model, it assumes that we're proceeding with the FERC relicensing. And in Kian's presentation that he made last summer about the FERC relicensing, he indicated that they would need to add quite a few more staff. I think it was in the order of 5 or 6 more staff in order to manage the work affiliated with hydro or with FERC. So it seems like if our model is assuming FERC relicensing is taking place, then we also need to add that additional hydro staff. And I mean, it might not be that they all come in at once, but if we're making the assumption FERC is being implemented, then we should add the hydro staff that's required and or any other district staff that are required to support that effort.
Karen, that hydro business plan is still under development. I'm not sure it's a direct one-to-one relationship that should we get our FERC license and have to bond for projects that specifically means that we have staff necessary to fulfill those projects cost dollars. A lot of these initial FERC licensing needs are for planning, develop plans for such, develop plans for all of these different activities. If I understand, the hydro's objective on a lot of this is not that we're going to have bodies right away to facilitate the activity and to complete the activity, but a lot of it's going to be, frankly, consulting work that's going to be planning and developing these FERC needs in the initial short term. I could be wrong about that, but I think that was that's the gist of where the hydro business plan is sort of taking it.
That's great to know. I just would like that is probably, I mean, I think you're, I'm not sure, Marvin, if you put that as an assumption there, but I think that needs to be explicit, that that there's no planned staff increases in hydro. And I'm not picking on hydro, it could be water or rec as well, or administrative. I just want to, FERC is such a big thing. And in fact, if the staffing requirement is, 2032 or something, that's great. I just want to be, I don't want to have us do something and then go, oh, surprise.
Yeah, we can do that. We'll talk to Ian, perhaps it's 1 or 2, but I'm not I'm not certain it's into the 5 or 6, you know, within this window.
Yeah, there you go.
But we should make a footnote of that so that it's accounted for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can we have a 5-minute break?
Yeah. You know, let's go ahead and take. Well, I think we're at the point of probably public questions, and any more questions you have and want to change the numbers around. If we do, I still want to talk about maybe how we want to bring this to the board next week. So let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 5 minutes from now. So 23 after or so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll be right back. Do we have Karen? Karen, are you back with us? Oh, you need to unmute, please.
Now I'm back and I can talk.
Wonderful. Okay. We're just time check. We're at 11:30. Just want to keep us moving. We can go back into the model. Maybe the thing is we do have kind of the percentage corrected, or at least appropriate, as we look at the 5-year model, back close down to the 50-50 that we wanted. Recognizing the fact that we're bumping along the 55 million total reserves, we can't get below 50, and we've got a debt service ratio of around 1.6, and we really don't want to get too much lower than that, or 1.5.
Yeah.
Right? We don't want to go too low. So why don't we play with a couple of the assumptions on the rate increase, and see if we can see how low we can get on those increases, and then we can keep talking. I do recognize that there are some members of the public who have raised your hand, and I appreciate you holding on. Do we want to keep going on this, or do we want a question at this point? Do you think, Chris, are you happy to?
I have one question. I think we can take that.
Do we have one question out there?
One.
John Norton?
I guess I don't have a question. I have a suggestion. I participated in the last rate increase committee, and the discussions going on here today are deja vu all over again.
Yes, they are.
And, you know, I would like the directors and the staff to look at the rate committee that's going to be here 5 years from now. What can you do to put them in a better position so that we're not on continual rate increases to solve our problems? And some suggestions are, you need a detailed evaluation of hydroelectric, looking at a 10-year period at least, and have a goal of increasing the hydroelectric subsidy. 2, you need to reduce raw water delivery costs. Look at automation, just look at that whole system. What can we do over the next 5 years? You don't have to solve the problem in the 5 years, but have a plan to solve the problem over 5 years. Really take a close look at your capital improvement program and see if all those projects are essential. And 4th, please avoid more staff increases if at all possible. The staffing increases over the past few years have been significant, and that's really adding to the cost burden. And that puts you on a cycle of continued 5, 6, 7, 8% increases per year. So have some sympathy on the next rate committee, which could be you 5 years from now. Thank you.
John, I appreciate that. Just a couple comments, if I may, on that. We do have a commitment within the upcoming ag management plan that will be posted, I believe, by the end of the day today for next board meeting, in order to create a water efficiency upgrades. So that's in there in the ag management plan as a plan. You mentioned create a plan, don't have to do it, but we've already added that to our ag management plan, which has been at the request of the public and the board. We've been talking about bringing a capital improvement plan process and how NID does that, and so we'll be bringing that to the board here within the next few or couple months in order to educate the board on what our capital plan processes are and what our projects are looking like. So I appreciate that. The hydro department, we did talk about a hydro business plan as we move into FERC, and I definitely appreciate the fact that we need to be looking at how the hydro department is being developed as we move into FERC processes, so that is coming, and certainly staffing is always a critical factor in budgets and moving forward. As you see in this plan, 5 years from now, we haven't increased staff at all. Perhaps we should, based on the last conversation with Director Holt, but right now it's not an increase at all in this 5-year projection to date, but I just wanted to touch on those 4 things.
And also, John, I could add to that. If you think about our overhead costs, our overhead cost is about half of the actual budget, about $20 million. Once we get the ERP in, fully automated, and we get it in functioning properly, as people normally retire, and they will retire over the next 5 years, once our processes are efficient and automated, we're not going to have to backfill. We're on manual payroll, where we got people typing in time cards. So we're gonna experience tremendous efficiency. You're gonna see it because the process is going to be automated. People are not going to be touching the same piece of paper, and you're going to see it over time once it gets in there. It's kind of hard to see it now, I know, because when people leave, we immediately run to replace them. But once we get this thing dialed in right, the way we're doing it, we got $20 million overhead. We're not going to need all. You're not going to lay people off. People just going to normally leave, and they normally retire. Your processes are set up that you're going to have to backfill.
Well, that'll come. We'll see how that plays out. Let's go ahead and go back to the model and start seeing where we can.
But I mean, that's the ideal of a new ERP system.
Right.
Correct. For sure.
Well, and the part that John brought up, that is the quandary we live with every day in operations, is how do you deliver the water cheaper but spend extra money to automate the system?
Yes.
It's very difficult. We balance that line every day.
Correct.
Yeah, it's a benefit that you're going to realize over more than 5 years.
ROI is long.
Yeah, there it is. So for this, what we were going to do is we're going to reduce some of these percentages because we're going to get as close as we can to the 50 million unrestricted reserve. I think we're about at 55 now. So for the treated base customer, let's go with 5 all the way across.
That's what I was going to suggest, is just reduce it by 1 and see what happens.
Yeah, we'll go with 5 all the way across. So we reduced 1 all the way across for each one of these guys. This guy goes to 3.5. Danette is, thank you, Danette. This guy goes to 8. Yep. And this guy goes to 6. And now we will look at the water. There we go. Okay, so as we can see, we're okay. Don't be alarmed because that 49 is going to change because we're going to issue less debt. So we're going to go to the debt tab, new debt.
Can I ask a question here real quick?
Mm-hmm.
In relation to Mr. Norton's question, in that tab we just looked at, we are bottoming out at 49. Are we rebounding after that, Marvin? Is this a true low point where after 2026 we have some sort of obligation that stops and we start to rebound?
This is a low point because remember over those last couple of years, we're not going to get a certain amount of hydro revenue due to the rewind. So we're going to rebound.
So that will help. The PERS allocation is going to help in the next 5-year window, right?
That's right. That's right.
So there are other things that may help us pull back out.
We should rebound. We will rebound. Sure. One of the things, the biggest thing is that we're not going to lose the hydro revenue,
right,
because of the rewind. So we're going to rebound. Yeah. So in this instance, we're going to take the reserves up. So where we see the permanent license, let us go here with just divide that by 2. So equals this divided by 2.
Well,
what we're saying is that we're going to issue instead of issuing 83 million, we will issue 63 million. Okay? So, you know, the projects can change, but we're going to issue less. Now we're going to look at our reserves now. The water, yeah. So, you notice that just by issuing 20 million less in debt, what happened to the reserves?
You went up.
Okay, now look at the debt service coverage. So that tab there. We're back up again. We were down to about one. You scroll down a little bit to that, and scroll down just a little bit more. Scroll down a little bit more. There we go. So we were down to about 1.6. We're back up to 1.7. So just by moving those few levers, and you can see the amount of reduction in the treaty rate. Now it still goes the same. Even if we take the water rates down, and we take off the debt coverage another 20 million, you're going to see the same thing. It just depends upon, look at it like this 5-year window, how much do you want the rate coverage, the rate guys to bear with this 5-year window? They're going to bear some every 5-year window. It just depends upon how much.
Right.
Now, let me ask another question here, Marvin. We're looking at a 5-year window, a rates package, although we don't want to go through a 2020.
It's only 5 years.
I know, but we don't, it can be less than. You want to get as far in a rate package as you can, but the last rate window is only 3 years.
So the rate package was 5 years. The board just chose to adopt only a 3-year rate increase.
Oh,
The water rate report is 5. So,
okay.
and the reason why we do 5 is because this is what the bond markets charge. So like if we have to issue debt, they're going to say, give me your official statement. It's got to have a 5-year forecast. So you want to at least forecast out 5. Can you go longer? Of course, but you want to go out at least, make sure you go at least 5.
Yeah, I guess I was looking at, 3 is even, by 3, we're not really issuing the debt.
Exactly.
But anyway, that's,
yeah. But and also too, the 218 rules, in the government code, they are kind of based around the cost of service for the 5 years.
yeah, right, yeah.
They're kind of based around that. You could do one every year, but you don't necessarily do one every year.
No, we
Yeah,
don't want to
yeah.
do that. So, yeah, we want to be careful with that, the debt service. Go back to that tab, right? I mean,
The new debt,
the new debt,
you could issue less.
right. I'm thinking that's a little heavy, but
Okay.
that's cutting it in half.
So let's say even if you took the 21 and you just divide that by 4, say, instead of dividing by 2, you divide it by 4. Yeah, there you go. Now, so saying we're going to issue 50.
No, I don't want to go that route.
Yeah.
Go that route.
But what I'm saying is it's going to help your reserve.
I know it will. I think that's going the wrong way. Yeah,
Yeah.
go 1.5.
There you go.
Okay, to me,
Yeah.
the Scotts Flat Spillway, the Comey Scour, and the FERC are, they're have to do.
Some of them you kind of got to do.
DSOD and.
Some of you kind of got to do.
Yeah.
But Ken said you might be able to squeeze the annual license for another 5 years. In other words, this is a permanent license. We're getting the annual license.
Right.
He's saying you might be able to squeeze it for another, through this window.
As a matter of point of information, what is it costing us today for FERC? Do we have a number?
It's a little protracted, or it's a little extended because of legal costs.
Yeah.
But, I don't know, our annual permit is, I'm not sure what that dollar amount is.
All right,
Yeah.
but it's gonna go up.
It's probably somewhere in the nature of, I would think about $400,000 or $500,000.
I believe this estimate is on top of our everyday cost.
On top,
Yeah.
this is the new,
Strictly for new license.
new license.
Yeah, this is for the permanent license.
Right.
But eventually,
This is for the new 4E conditions
there
that
you
are
go.
placed on us within that first 5 to 7 year window,
Right.
which is roughly, we estimated about a $70 or $60 million price tag.
My point for
Yeah.
not for discussing with the public what is happening with AID, this is an area that I can show. We went from this number each year to if you take 42 divided by 40 years, 218 by 40 years is $5 million a year average, okay? What's our average today? If it's 500,000, that's a big lift. If we're spending 500,000 today versus 5 million average over 40 years, that's a huge lift, and that money, that's money that has to come from somewhere.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, without a doubt. But practice my law.
No, but it's true, on this list, you know, the Scott's Flat, the Combi, Stability, those two, and again, Kian's not here to really, and Chip, you may know more, but, you know, those would have to happen.
Those would have to happen,
Right.
yes. And Chip can keep the Lake Wildwood treatment plant running longer, right, Chip?
Well, that's the one.
He said the last time he could.
I was gonna speak up, but it's either a E. George to Lake Wildwood BEP or it's upgrade the plant. Something has to give.
Something's gotta
eventually.
give.
We can't
No,
keep kicking
and I
that
say
can.
that facetiously because that's something we could, you know, when push comes to shove, well, here's a bill over here that they're gonna shut us down if we don't do this.
If you don't do that, go.
That one you can go take.
Quality of your water go start messing up.
Well, and part of when we look at the capital plan, Chip, is it that maybe some of those costs of the 5.7, could be incorporated in an annual basis for, just similar like we did with Lake Wildwood BEP. We removed Lake Wildwood BEP from this equation a number of months ago, right, when we started this year's budget, and said, we'll do it in an incremental, programmatic process. It's, you know,
And that little dot is still in there. If you click in that cell, you see that money, we removed. So we were considering the bonding, then we took it out.
But there are a lot of unknowns in this chart.
Yeah.
Right, but we would be naive to think that we can just ignore them too, right?
There you
So
go.
we have to kind of plan for worst case scenario at the same time.
We have to.
But you have to balance that with, you don't wanna overinflate rates either. That's where it becomes so tricky.
right, that's the art of it, and, you know, by looking, what do we have before, 83, and right now it's 70?
That's it.
It's
I don't know.
42.
About 70.
Overall.
Overall.
That's
Overall.
right.
Yeah, so if you look at the water tab, and we look at the reserves now, and you can see the reserves will go down to the 52, at the end of the forecast.
We didn't look at how that changes the rate.
Oh, yeah, we can look at the rates. The treatment tab, the treated guys are still in good shape. The raw, let's look at the raw, because this is the heaviest on them.
Not a huge change.
The raw guys, they received somewhat, it's not a huge change from the last scenario because we're issuing less debt. So, and that's kind of where it's at. Now, what's the average rate? Go back to the assumption. Let's say the average rate for the raw. So the average rate for the raw is 7%. So the average rate is 7. Last year they got an average rate of about 6. I don't know. The treated average rate is about 4, because remember we're trying to come in line with the cost allocation of what customers should be paying.
The allocation goes to
Yeah,
the
so we go to
allocation.
the revenue requirement. Go to that revenue requirement, and you see we pretty much are in line with that at the end of 2026. You see that? We're almost in line with it. So.
Yeah.
But that's a heavy lift on the raw guy, you know.
But we changed the base rate, right? I mean.
So yeah, if we go back to.
I keep forgetting how that all comes.
So if we go back to the assumptions tab, we can see the base rate the raw guy just gotta come up, okay? Raw is treated, but he has to come up, more on the base rate portion.
More on the base rate.
Yeah. So.
After all that question.
I guess the question is this what we want to bring as an informational item?
Karen has her hand ready.
Karen, okay.
Well, go ahead and finish what you were saying, Marvin.
Oh, no, all I was saying was this. Once we finish with the, manipulating, this will be the informational item we'll bring to the board.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think, as I said before, I think you've done a great job on this. And I really appreciate the amount of effort it took to get to this point, that many people contributed to this. I think part of our discussion that we haven't had today that will probably be within the board setting is what areas could we look at to drive down organizational cost? Because, part of what John Norton was saying is, if every board just passes on these rate increases without looking at the expense side, and I just think that's not part of what we talked about today, and it needs to be part of the conversation, and that we would know what the impact of cost control, what are the options for cost control, and what are the implications of cost control? Because I am well aware that cost control has impact to service and potentially system reliability. So, but I still think we have to have that as part of our discussion. The other part is, I'm sorry, but I have to sign off this call because I have to get to another commitment right now. And so thank you for having me today with my pestery questions. And you guys did great. Really appreciate the work.
Karen, before you get off, I just want the committee's recommendation that we bring this kind of as it is right now to the board next week as a starting point. This, again, this isn't the rate setting process. This is just informing the board kind of what we've done to adjust some of these numbers and kind of where they stand. They're not set in stone. I don't want anybody to be thinking that this is the number. But are you comfortable with bringing this as a concept? And then, Karen, the appropriate question is exactly what you just talked about and iterated.
Right.
Yeah, I think definitely it's prime time for the board and the public. And I think like I said, I think you've done a great job with it, and gives us a great tool to be able to explore options and implications that pretty much with an easy, kind of maneuvering. So I think that's great. And my only suggestion is that we do have that annual operating profit and loss, which Marvin said he was happy to do.
I'll add it. Yeah, I'll add it.
Okay, Marvin will add that.
Yep, I'll add that, guy.
Thank you, Marvin, and thank you, Greg.
You got it. Are there any other public questions, public comments? Okay. Are you comfortable?
Fine. Yes. Very good. I agree with what Karen said. I think it's a great job being able to, and I like being able to play in the sandbox. That's fun.
Okay. Well, with that, we'll thank you, committee members. We'll go ahead and sign off on the meeting today. Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.